Welcome to Indications and Warnings, everyone, with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show on June 17, 2025. It is day 1210 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck and I are recording this show the day after another night of Russian terror launched on Kyiv and a half dozen other cities in Ukraine.
Yes, last night's attack was billed as the largest drone and missile attack against Kyiv. I have a hunch that equates to the largest drone and missile attack ever staged on any Ukrainian city, given that Kyiv is always at the top of the target list. Thomas, our producer and director, will probably be showing you now some videos of typical Russian strikes. Notice, folks, that they are hitting in the middle of 30-story apartment blocks. I would suggest to you there are no military targets there. But if you are trying to kill disabled people who cannot negotiate 30 flights of stairs when the power is turned off, then you are hitting exactly where you want to. And unfortunately, Alan, the casualty rates, they depict a high civilian number of casualties.
Well, recovery efforts and rescue efforts are actually still underway, but the last report I saw, Chuck, was 15 people had been killed, almost 120 injured. Those numbers are simply likely to go up. Just in terms of the scale of this attack, and Russia can launch this kind of attack virtually every night now, Chuck. These were 440 Shahed drones launched across the entire country. 2 Kinzhal ballistic missiles, 4 caliber cruise missiles, 16 other cruise missiles. This is a massive attack.
Right, and we're seeing a slight shift in the modalities of these attacks. The majority of Russian cruise missiles and even a fair percentage of their Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles are intercepted. But what Ukraine is finding it hard to deal with, as anyone would, and including any city in the United States, believe me, you are virtually defenseless unless you happen to live in Washington. And then I don't think you're that, I won't go into it, but you're not as safe as you think you are. But a point target is going to have a very difficult time dealing with 400 murder drones coming at you. If there is a silver lining, it's that I don't think Iran is in the Shahed export business anymore, but Russia's making their granite knockoffs, and they work just as good, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is one of the side effects of the Israeli strikes on Iran. No more Iranian military exports to Russia, but Iran really set Russia up to manufacture its drones inside Russia. Since that time, Russia is now setting up North Korea to manufacture drones. So Russia doesn't actually rely on Iran either for the export of drones or, for that matter, parts to make these drones with. Russia can do it all on its own. I think able to make, thousands of Shahed drones. So this is different than making an FPV drone or a Mavic. These are what I'll call, killer whale sized drones. It takes a little bit more effort to produce those. They're not produced in the millions, but they are produced in the thousands. So Russia is still able to launch 400 or 500 Shahed attack drones and decoys every night against Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to get an idea of how big these things are, the Shaheds, they're about the size of a barn door. So they're big. They're made mostly out of plywood and laminate. So they aren't, the most radar reflective target. They still use reciprocating engines in the main. However, they have evolved into turbojet powered, which makes them faster. On the scale of an incoming airborne threat, point defense systems should be able to take them out, and that ranges from manpads, OSA, Strela, Stinger, Hawk missile system, which is a highly mobile. It isn't a man-portable system, but highly mobile. And the Gepard is the slayer of Shaheeds, and this is a radar-guided cannon that has 20 millimeter shells. Actually, it might be 30 millimeter, but inside the shell is a proximity fuse, which is pretty amazing because the projectile is about that big. And that what a proximity fuse does is it's fired and the target is illuminated, and the proximity fuse senses as long as it is closing on the target, it will wait. As soon as it gets away from the target, it will explode. So in hit to kill mode, it'll just go till it hits, but the proximity fuse ensures that no shell is wasted. And the Gepards have knocked down thousands of Shaheeds. The problem is Ukraine could use 100, 200 more Gepards today.
Easily, Ukraine can still use more of everything, especially in the category of air defense. This war of terror that seems to be taking over the summer of 2025, launched by Russia against Ukraine, has only one purpose, and that is to uh, make the Ukrainian people cower in fear. And the Ukrainian people are not doing that, Chuck.
It isn't in their character.
No.
I mean, this is a people who have been tested over the last half a millennia, and they have maintained their nationhood in the faces of genocide, politically engineered famine. They bore the brunt of two world wars. Uh, Nationhood means something to them. They also know that freedom isn't free. I know that's corny, but folks, it's true. It's something precious, and if you don't protect it, some bully's going to take it away from you. So, in terms of breaking the will of the Ukrainian people, it's simply not going to happen. You want to get their backs up? I think you're doing that pretty well.
I think that is exactly what is happening in Ukraine, all over Ukraine. Um, the people are coming closer and closer together as a unified community in opposition, obviously, to the genocide that Russia is trying to commit here. And as much destruction as the drones and Kinzhal and ballistic and cruise missiles do, Russia is also within artillery range of many Ukrainian cities, Sumy, for example, Kherson, uh, pretty close in Kharkiv. And the Russians have used artillery to devastate Pokrovsk and Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, Bakhmut, very, very small farm villages. But in total, this is what the Russians have destroyed in Ukraine: 143,000 private homes, 24,000 apartment buildings. So this is uh, the equivalent. It's equal to wiping out every home in a city the size of Atlanta, Chuck.
Good Lord. We can add to that 1,500 plus hospitals, clinics of various kinds, including obstetrics, delivery clinics, oncology wards. I mean, there used to be this concept, Alan, of black propaganda, where I would make up this outrageous accusation and throw it at you, like you bombed a children's oncology ward. But there's no need for black propaganda in this war because whatever despicable act you can conceive in your mind, the Russians have already done it in spades. And none of these are collateral damage, okay? These were deliberately targeted. And watch these horrific videos of cruise missiles, precision guided weapons slamming into the middle of apartment buildings, right?
Well, Chuck, it was just a year ago before the 75th anniversary of NATO that Russia struck the Children's Cancer Hospital in the middle of Kyiv. Now, while this terror attack was going on, and as I say, I fully expect another terror attack tonight. The G7 was meeting in Canada. Putin is sending a message. He does not want peace. Now, Donald Trump has given him multiple deadlines, usually 2 weeks. The last 2 week deadline to Vladimir Putin was 3 weeks ago, and still Donald Trump is not imposing new sanctions on Russia, is not sending additional military aid to Ukraine, and is not uniting with other members of the G7 in confronting Russian terror and aggression. That's just the way it is.
It might eventually, the light might eventually go on in Washington that the United States is being made to look like a monkey. And I encouraged only slightly today when word came out of Washington that a group working to, let's say, a working group to find a way for Russia to return to the negotiation table, that it was told to a vast heaving today. Go home and forget about it. Fascinating little bits of dialogue come out of Washington all the time. One of them is Ukraine, stop hitting Russia's energy infrastructure. Okay. How about asking Russia to please stop hitting high density urban housing environments in Ukraine? There is no moral equivalency. Russia has to do this because they cannot find Ukrainian military targets. They are too well camouflaged, too well dispersed. Ukraine is too well versed in this first 21st century war. There used to be giant supply dumps and all the things that happened in wars previous to this. It doesn't exist anymore. It's just in time delivery, and you're not trying to hit a giant warehouse. You're trying to hit a moving van going down a street somewhere.
Yeah.
So this is Russia's way of waging war. But we also have some. Well, when we hit the maps later, Alan, we've got some interesting news that won't come as news to any of our listeners because things are happening.
We're going to get to those maps in very quick order here, Chuck. I just want to say one thing additionally. At least in my understanding of American history, I don't believe any president has ever been elected to lead the United States in retreat or to lead the United States into the clutches of a sworn enemy. And this is what it appears to me Donald Trump is doing.
Well, it seems incredible that you'd have to remind people like Tucker Carlson that Russia has been the sworn and determined enemy of the United States since the October Revolution. You know, Tucker, maybe you didn't get to read this brief, but I have read KGB and FSB documents. We are referred to as the perennial foe.
Mm-hmm.
We are always the enemy. Well, they've abandoned Marxism. They just want, no. They have not abandoned that perverse nucleus of Marxism, which is world domination. And I'm sorry if you're a Marxist and you're listening to this. The thing that they retained is the only legitimate means of political change is blood-soaked violence, right out of Marx. You don't get voted in, that's not good enough. You have to tear down, destroy, murder and kill. And every Marxist regime all over the world has followed that. Russia has jettisoned Marxism, it's retained oligarchy and a truly fascist arrangement, which is when those in power collaborate with those in industry. They still have the same playbook, Alan.
Yeah.
They're never going to be our friends. They're never the friends of liberty. They're never the friends of Europe, and they've got to be stopped here in Ukraine.
Yeah, they do. I guess to put a final point on it, what I don't understand is why Donald Trump fails to grasp that right now his inaction uh, is increasing the death toll in Ukraine because of Donald Trump's inaction. Thousands of more Ukrainians, civilians and soldiers, are going to be killed by Russia. But regardless of what I regard as that fact, uh, some pretty interesting things are happening on the zero line. And I think we should go directly to the map in Kreminna. This, of course, is in the Liman direction. What's interesting is that in less than a week now, we can compare the 11 June map to the 17 June map. Suddenly, Russians are beginning to surrender here.
Well, we sometimes I hate that we get things right, but we spoke a while ago about Ukraine's local commanders have to balance insufficient resources with an overabundance of enemies, and something has to give. So what you want to do is you have to give something. You want to give the least desirable terrain possible to the enemy. And if you are looking at that 17 June map right now, all of the area to the west of the Zarabets River is precisely fits that description. Because, and we've talked about this as well, reaching the objective and taking the objective and holding the objective are three totally different things. And we have gotten the reports now that, and we're conservatively, because we don't want to overhype this, but Russian troops are reported to be surrendering by the dozen. Okay, and a dozen's a good number for a military guy because that's just about an entire rifle squad, which means their entire tactical elements are surrendering, reporting that they've been without water for 3 or 4 days. They've been without food. They're out of ammunition, etc. All of this contributing to what Alan likes to call a brittle force posture.
Well, these surrenders are happening exactly as you would expect, where you would expect. So this to the north of Liman, the west of the Zarabets, in that relatively large salient that Russia created by crossing the Zarabets River. I mean, you pointed out immediately, Chuck, this is barren, open terrain. So uh, just a killing field for Ukrainian drones. And if Russian soldiers are surrendering because they have run out of supplies, you'd have to say it would be pretty tough to supply Russian troops on the west side of the Zarabets, don't you think?
Absolutely. And what is also encouraging is at least some of these surrenders are occurring south of the Zarabets Reservoir in what appears to be the Serebryansk forestry area, which is a cover-rich environment, right? If I've got enough water and enough bullets and enough forest, I mean, I'm going to be in there for a long time. But what we've seen in the videos, we have literally seen Ukrainian FPV drones dropping leaflets on soldiers who have broken cover. And those leaflets, I think we'll publish one this afternoon again. They are written in Ukrainian and in Russian, and it tells you take your magazine out, put your rifle over your back with the muzzle pointed down, keep your hands up, and walk forward. And unlike those Ukrainian soldiers unfortunate enough to be captured on the battlefield, you won't be executed out of hand.
Yeah.
This is another reason, again, the brutality and the walnut-sized brain of Russian military leadership. You want to convince those people to surrender, convince them that there is peace and safety. Surrender. We're going to feed you. We're going to give you 3 hots and a flop, and life is going to be good. Russia, on the other hand, has convinced every Ukrainian soldier, fight to the death, because if you fall into our hands, we will murder you.
Mm-hmm.
That explains a lot of what's going on the battlefield right now. But we're very encouraged by these surrenders. And as we get more information, I mean, this just broke, as Ellen and I were saying here, just a couple of hours ago.
Yeah.
So we'll give you more information as we know it.
I think it's interesting also in Kreminna, this is where Russia has maintained a superiority of forces of roughly 10 to 1 or even 12 to 1, depending on how Ukraine deploys its defense forces. So if there are surrenders in a theater where Russia enjoys such great superiority, you might assume it is Ukrainian drones cutting off ground lines of communication and supply that is causing the big problem for Russia here, because they must have the supplies somewhere back in Kreminna. They just can't get them forward.
Well, there's you would think, right? You would think, but there are so many moving parts and criminal enterprises that exist within the Russian military. Who knows? I like to bring this one up. So one of the 2 winters ago, the Russians opened a warehouse that was supposed to have 1 million sets of winter uniforms. Listen, you can go out and buy a winter coat to go skiing, but look, winter military uniforms are well made, they're expensive, and somebody sold them all, right? They were all gone. They had been sold to Joe's surplus store or wherever. The other thing that we're seeing is, you would think that they have the logistics, they have the beans and the bullets and the band-aids, but I'll point out that if you're depending on donkeys and motorcycles and civilian vehicles with the doors taken off, that isn't going to cut it. They've also, as 2 years ago, they went through all of the logistic services of the Russian army, took away everyone's truck keys and handed them a rifle and got them all killed. And it never occurred to them that logistics is a military occupational specialty. You need logisticians. You need people who are trained to do this. And now it is ad hoc, and it's showing.
Yeah. So we're going to keep our eye on Kreminna, on what is happening in the Liman direction, see if there are indeed additional Russian surrenders. When a rifle squad surrenders as a unit, as appears to be happening, does it create a kind of domino effect on the battle line, Chuck? Does it create any opportunity for Ukraine to strike through anywhere?
It really could, and that entered my mind. Generally there are 3 rifle squads in a platoon, and ideally you want them to operate in support of each other, which means they're all dispersed, but within rifle range. They have designated fields of fire. I could go into a million things that I am absolutely certain Russian conscripts have no idea. Interlocking field of fire, what the hell is that? Right? I think what we see, though, and with this brittle force, look, these soldiers are surrendering because they're starving.
Yeah.
They haven't had water in 3 days. They are at their physical limits. This is what I mean by a brittle force. So when the sergeant and the corporal get knocked off in this rifle squad, you've got 10 guys who can look at each other and go, screw this. Okay, does that lead to larger? Yeah, it can, because if first squad is over here on my right and I look over and they're all walking forward with their hands up, nobody's on the right anymore. So at the very least, I've got to shift myself over, but you probably don't want to do that. You get out of your little spider hole and a drone's going to land on your head. So these surrenders do create opportunity. So we'll see, and we'll be watching. We got a brand new Kreminna map up. The zero line was updated just this morning, so we'll see.
Good.
We'll see what changes.
Developments around Velika Novosilka. I find this especially interesting. It really is a Ukrainian raid, but it's developed in the course of about the last week. I think there were signs of it. Um, well, maybe or I say a week, maybe 4 or 5 days ago, the first signs of a Ukrainian raid down the Mokriali River.
Yeah, and they got pretty far. They got almost Mokriali River. They got almost to the TO5 18 highway. So they did threaten the Russian ground lines of communication into Velika Novosilka. I didn't know if that was going to stick, and that's the difference between a raid and an offensive operation, right? That they were going to hold on to it. What surprised me that it penetrated pretty deeply, 10 kilometers, 6 miles for a raid. There were numerous points of contact, both on the east and the west banks of the Mokriali. They pulled back. But now we've got attacks going on to the northwest of Velika Novosilka. What you can't see on this map is that the Russians were compelled to do something. After that raid down the river valley, they sent hundreds and hundreds of people north, and they had to come from somewhere. And looking at this contact map from 17 June, I think I can see the places where they were taken from because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points of contact there, again, closer to Velika Novosilka. Do the Ukrainians want to take Velika Novosilka back? I don't think so. But running the Russians all over the battlefield, that is a desirable military objective.
And
Move them, wear them out, and hit them.
And the Russians had to call in numerous airstrikes here to hit Ukrainian positions. That also tells you just how much alarm the Russians were in.
Yeah, and we keep saying this, but it's still true beneath the veneer that Russia is putting up. Their army is tired. It's worn out. They've lost more tanks than all 6 times the number of tanks that all European NATO members have together. They've lost 6 times the forces in the U.S. Army ground forces. They've lost 1 million. It isn't winning. And the other thing is, look, they are never going to win the war. Not with this leadership and not with the diminishing stub of an army that they have now. Their combat effectiveness is squat, right? When you have tactical formations surrendering in their entirety, i.e., those rifle squads, it just shows. It just absolutely shows you that this is no longer a fighting force with anything like its combat potential actualized. It's just not happening, and it's not going to get better, Alan. It can't.
Well, these raiding forces that Ukraine sent down the Mokriali River towards Velika Novosilka, and those are probably pretty light forces when you come right down to it. And their their sudden rush forward does tell you something either about morale or about how Russia has deployed troops on the zero line. Morale could be extraordinarily bad everywhere. Uh, I know that Russia still wants to take Pokrovsk. Maybe they've redeployed troops from Velika Novosilka to the Pokrovsk zero line.
The Ukrainians are really good at seizing opportunities. And again, that goes back to that NATO training, right? A Russian soldier is ordered to do something when you tell him to do it, where you tell him to do it, and do no more, no less, and ask no question. And junior officers and NCOs in a NATO army don't don't ask me for permission, right? You come back with a scalp. If you see an opportunity, take it. But your point is well taken, Alan, regarding this thrust down the Mokriyali River. Uh, they punched through and then they just kept going.
Yeah.
And it seeing the contacts on both sides of the river, look, these are soldiers who are going down the river. They have their the river is on their left flank. They're secure there. They're not just satisfied with that. As soon as they get to a place to cross, they got over on the left bank too. So you're a Russian, 3 a.m., all of a sudden they're shooting in front of you. You pick up the radio, and all of a sudden they're shooting behind you. And all of a sudden you get to the only bridge across the river, and the Ukrainians have got it. I mean, so it was a big raid. And look, they didn't come back with just the people they went over with, right? They were grabbing prisoners. They were scooping up headquarters elements, codes, radios, everything that you do in a raid. But they went in 6 miles.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't think that's a long distance, folks, put 100 pounds on your back, grab a rifle, and go on a 6 mile run and tell me if that's a long way or not.
And notice that Chuck said run, not walk.
Yeah, well, you would know when to run too, folks. Sometimes,
Well,
and I'm no longer in the running business with 100 pounds on my back. I'm just
so when we look at those successive maps from Velika Novosilka, very clear that we're looking at a raid, not a counterattack. Uh, but what is equally interesting, I think that when you look at these maps in a series, they are a pretty good picture of what you so often talk about, Chuck, Ukraine's ability to concentrate and then disperse, because this must be what they had to do going down the river valley.
absolutely, and that is to hit them and forget them, as we used to say. But they kept pushing, right? It's the other thing in contact. I mean, if you're watching a Bruce Willis movie, you know he's going to make it to the end. But when it's you in contact in the enemy rear at night, believe me, as a commander, you are constantly thinking, okay, when are they going to get me? Right. So this was very well conducted. I've also noticed an error on the map, which is a layering problem. There are some contacts on the extreme left part of the map. Those are battle icons that got onto the wrong layer, so I'll correct those. But what we see here is Ukraine is doing the penetration of the zero line, so I will correct that.
So if we move now up to Chazov Yar outside Kostya Tanivka, and we're seeing again a surprise Ukrainian contact practically once again looking at the canal that runs, I'll just say roughly north-south uh, uh, past Chazov Yar. That canal was an incredibly important defensive line weeks and weeks ago, as Russia had to cross it in order to assault Chazov Yar. Now the Ukrainians are right back there.
Yeah, this is it as canals go, it isn't really very big. And anyone who's been to California and the San Joaquin Valley, you see these things. The water course is only maybe 10 feet wide, but cement embankments. It's a perfect vehicle trap. You can't get a vehicle over it. And here we have that same position again. So south of Chasiv Yar, the Russians are operating to the west of the canal, which means that everything that they need, and put it this way, 1,000 rounds a day per soldier. And I don't know. I think the most I ever went through a day was maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 7,000 rounds in a day. So you don't want to run out, right? Because if you run out, you're no longer a soldier, you're a homeless person. But Ukraine striking there near Predachene is engaging a Russian force that is, going to be running low on everything. And whatever has to get to them, you can see little bands of forest to the northeast of the contact points. But everything that is coming to those Russian soldiers not only has to cross that canal, and again, nothing flies over it. There's a crossing point. They put it up. You know where it is, and your artillery knows where it is. But again, it's not just the canal, it's got to come over wide open terrain. And that means the drones are eating them alive.
Yeah.
The other thing that's going on here, and people are, well, why don't the Ukrainians attack more? Well, given that they're resource starved, and given that they can constantly depend on the Russians coming to them, no matter how fruitless the attack, no matter how ineptly it's run, the Russians will keep coming. So you don't have to move. You don't have to pay the freight. You don't have to burn the gas. They're showing up to you. And they're predictable, which is why their losses are 1 battalion every day. Yeah. Today was 1,060 they lost yesterday. So again, only the Russians could fight this way, Alan. No Western army would allow that kind of leadership to continue because it's beyond them.
And it's about still 175 to slightly more than 200, maybe 210 attacks occurring a day all along the length of the zero line. But because here are some Ukrainian raids, counterattacks, just generally Ukraine taking advantage of local opportunities. But that tells you what isn't happening on the zero line for the Russians. What isn't happening is any concerted advance anywhere. And this, I think, also is what is provoking Putin to continue to launch these terror attacks on Ukrainian civilians in the cities. He's doing nothing on the zero line. He's trying to win a terror war, and aggressors don't win terror wars.
No, absolutely not. And to demonstrate not only the brutality, the evil, but the absolute futility. You have a $3 million cruise missile, right? You're not aiming for a big fuel depot because you don't know where that is. You're not aiming for a big ammunition storage plant. You're not aiming for drone central because they're produced in hundreds of locations all over the country. You're going to take that weapon and you're going to launch it into the middle of an apartment building because that's your target, right? You want to kill a couple of civilians, which is what they're doing. Last night, a horrendous attack, at least 15 dead, somewhere in the mid hundreds wounded. But I would suggest to our Russian listening guest, that's what you have to show. For over 400 drones, cruise missiles, aeroballistic missiles, you killed 15 people because the civil defense apparatus of Ukraine is brilliant. And Ukrainian civilians are cagey and they know where the shelters are and they take these alerts seriously and they go there. So these raids are militarily insignificant, right? They grab headlines. They're obscene. I'll give you all of that. Absolutely. But it isn't the way to win a war.
No. Kyiv itself was, I think the air raid alerts went off in Kyiv for 8 or 9 hours overnight, Chuck. And yes, the civilians do take these alerts very, very seriously. But just to touch briefly on some other areas on the zero line, up around Sumy, the Russian advance, so-called, into Sumy Oblast has essentially been stopped. It's really cross-border fighting between Sumy Oblast in Ukraine and Kursk Oblast in Russia. There doesn't seem to be, again, any great move forward by the Russians, even though it's been reported this is Russia's attempt to open a new northern front. It doesn't appear to be happening.
No, and it's foolish to underestimate your enemy, but I'm not far off when I'm saying this. The Russians have not put together a combined arms maneuver warfare offensive in almost 2.9 years. They can't do it. And they can't do it for a couple of reasons. Besides the ineptitude at the top, which I know I keep banging on, but everyone listening here knows what it's like to work under a boss who is clueless, right? Now imagine that it's life and death. It's not that the PowerPoint didn't get done or the conference room didn't get booked. You're dead. Okay, it isn't just that. The Russians are discovering in this 21st century war that everything they thought they knew about mechanized warfare, supply depots, armor to the front, mass formations operating in concert, none of that works on a 21st century battlefield. It doesn't work when the forward edge of the battlefield, which battle area, which used to be about a kilometer, is now 20 kilometers.
At least.
Meaning, at least, right? So it means you're within 20 miles of the zero line, you could get smoked at any time, right? So that makes it pretty hard to communicate your forces, concentrate them at a jump off point, have them briefed, and project them towards the enemy, because every one of those is an opportunity that Ukraine does not miss, right? It doesn't miss. And this explains Russian attack modality, one platoon, one company at a time. And it also gives us the reason why they're losing 1,000 men a day.
Yeah.
That isn't enough people. And the fact that they will launch 3 companies attacking within, let's say, 20 kilometers. They don't converge on anything, Alan. They're operating on their own hook. I mean, if you're too stupid to see that, you're truly hopeless, right?
Yeah. Well, is there a command reason for this on the Russian side? Is it the weakness of top commanders, or is it the more local commanders knowing they have to show something for the day? They have to follow their orders for the day, and that's what they do, regardless uh, of an overarching strategy that they're all bought into. They don't even know about it.
That is definitely that is certainly part of it. They appear to be operating on this quota system of attacks, uh, and the you look at it this way: you got a generation of officers who you can't get rich in the military, but these guys did. Right? It's this grift. It's this crime family. There are no officers in the Russian army who are like General Hodges, who are like General Ryan,
Yeah.
who are like Admiral Stavridis, any of the people that we've spoken to. They don't have anybody that competent. And, innovation on the battlefield gets punished in the Russian army, as it has been since imperial times. So what do they care? Right? Vatniks arrive by the busload and they just throw them to the front. And they get ground up. And nobody is going to write that general officer's fitness report and say he squandered manpower at the front. It isn't it. When every day in every one of these operations, we see a platoon or company wiped out in a fruitless daytime attack on a predictable line of attack over the same threat vector again and again and again, dereliction of duty. And dereliction of duty in combat is a capital offense, but not for these guys.
Yeah. We could go back to a map in the Bakhmut Pokrovsk theater of operation. It's from June 12, so 5 days ago. But the reason to look at it again is simply to emphasize nothing has changed.
The lines are pretty static, and I keep saying this, but folks, look, we're going to be right on this. Look, Russia can't win this war. If you want to win this war, you need to get brigade task groups together. You need to have a plan. They need to be interoperable. You've got to have your lines of communication in advance, all worked out. I just don't see anybody in the Russian military who can do that. I don't even see competent platoon commanders. Just don't see it. These guys are mailing it in.
Yeah.
And we're seeing these surrenders in Kreminna, and let's just say what the Ukrainians are saying. They have never seen this many people surrendering at once anytime in this war. Okay, so we don't know if that's in the hundreds now. We certainly know it's in the dozens.
Yeah.
But, okay, these were men, Russian soldiers, put into the attack, and they were surrendering, right? That's the easiest thing to do. Set your compass on 270. See that tree over there? Go there. Okay, here's the hard thing. Getting your ass kicked in this crazy funhouse at night with blinding flashes and bullets and bark flying all around your head. And you run back 400 yards and you say, God, thank God I lived. And you turn around and some lieutenant is blowing a whistle telling you to rally. That isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
They're going to throw down their guns and go like this. They did that in Kherson. They did it in Kharkiv. They're going to do it again. I promise you. They are not the kind of army that's going to make a stand like the fire zouaves at First Manassas. It isn't going to happen.
Well, what's interesting is the way it's happening in Kreminna right now. And again, if it's happening, we don't know yet. In Kharkiv and in Kherson, it was a result of concerted Ukrainian counterattacks, counteroffensives, even. In this case, it's simply a matter of exhausted Russian soldiers unable to execute that order to advance day after day after day. And again, as we look at the maps from the zero line, you are talking about Russian daily losses of 1,000 killed or wounded to achieve what? That not even the length of a football field to advance anywhere that I see on the zero line, Chuck. And yet they're losing 1,000 soldiers a day.
And they've lost 1 million men, and they hold less terrain now than they did 1 week after the invasion, right? So, and they are burning 1,000 soldiers a day, 360,000 casualties a year, and it's much more than that because that doesn't account for the days where there are 2,000 casualties,
right,
etc. This isn't working, Vladimir. It's not working. But all dictators live in this golden bubble, right? So we don't know what he's getting the brief on, but I'm sure no one is saying, hey, look, we have no strat. There are no Pentagon papers in this war, right? There is nobody writing this thing saying, hey, we have an army that's trained to fight the Russians in Eastern Europe. This Southeast Asia thing is not working out for us. We're not going to win this war. Okay, they came to that realization in late 1968. No bright young major in the Kremlin would dare to put that report on somebody's desk. So they are all in this fantasy, but they are not going to win this war, Alan. It isn't going to happen.
They're not. Both you and I, Chuck, scrolled through an article that appeared in the Washington Post. It was June 12 in the Washington Post. It's written by Riley McCabe. I don't know who Riley McCabe is. He's a fellow for the Warfare, Irregular Threats, and Terrorism program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And it's an easy article to scroll through, and you can do it very quickly because there are a lot of graphics that go with it. But he makes the same point you and I have been making on this program and on previous programs for years now, Chuck. But it's interesting to see such a thing in the Washington Post. There is a message that might be getting through.
There really is. And, having worked in Washington for a while, there's always this bit of intellectual snobbery, and it is the not invented here syndrome. So if you are outside the balcony shouting truth over the median, I mean, outside the beltway trying to shout over the incoming traffic, it doesn't gain ground. But I was very encouraged to see it. First of all, I agree with Mr. McCabe completely, and I congratulate him on being confident enough in his job to speak the truth to power.
Yeah.
Russia isn't going to win this. Look, here's the other thing. You can have superiority in mass at the point of attack, but if your soldiers are the kind that abandon 38% of their vehicles on the way to the fight, making certain to leave every hatch of their vehicle open. Folks, this isn't a coincidence. They didn't forget about it. They just, they do that so those vehicles will be blown up so they don't have to get close to the zero line. And these people have, their combat effectiveness is about 10% of what it could be. That means if I have an objective that I think a rifle squad could take, I've got to send 2 companies instead of 1 rifle squad to take this. And you don't have soldiers. A soldier needs to know how to shoot, move, and communicate, right? And there are a million subtasks. You got to know land navigation. Okay, well, I could do that. Can you do it at night in a forest? Can you walk a compass bearing and pace? Right? Alan, you are an outdoors person, right? You've had some night hikes.
Yeah.
You even knew where you were going and you know how to do it. And you stop and you go, holy shit, I hope I got this right.
Yep.
Me too.
Yeah, because you can't see anything in a forest at night.
No,
You just wouldn't believe how dark it is, frankly. And it looks nothing like it does in the day.
No.
You know, but aside from that, the other thing that strikes me, Chuck, because of Russia's continuing failure on the battlefield, it is provoking more Russian atrocities and more Russian war crimes of one kind or another. I have seen new reports of increased chemical warfare being used by Russia on the zero line. Have you seen those reports?
Yeah, I have. About 3 weeks ago, I did a point of impact segment for the Kiev Post. Go on there and take a look. I often hate being right about this, but we talked about the evolution of Russian chemical warfare in this struggle. They started out with anti-riot agents, tear gas grenades thrown on the zero line. Then they went to tear gas grenades dropped from drones. Then they went to some really pungent anti-riot agents, including irritants and asphyxiants. Again, you get tear gassed when you're at your rally, that's CS. There are other chemical munitions that are considered too inhumane to use on rioters, unless you are a Russian. One of them is PS. It is an irritant and an asphyxiant. We have charted the development of Russia, delivering them by hand, delivering them by drones, then delivering them with mortar shells, then delivering them with artillery, and now they're delivering them with rocket-based artillery. Recent film came out, a BM-21 Grad launcher, battlefield rocket launcher, was hit by a Ukrainian drone, and the Ukrainian signals intelligence copied the Russians panicking as they were asphyxiated by the poison gas that was in those warheads. I can't say for them, as my old headmaster used to say, but it simply shows that, again, every one of these is a war crime, right? There is this gray zone about using CS gas in warfare, but when you are loading rockets with it, and it is an asphyxiant, this is chemical warfare, right? It's chemical warfare. So again, that was 3 weeks ago. Did this special on it. Go on back to the Kiev Post and take a look. We'll walk you through the whole thing. But it's ongoing. It's endemic in this war. It's happening everywhere in every area of operation, and unfortunately, it's increasing.
Yeah. And I think that's the important point to make. I don't want viewers to think that, I am suggesting that frustration is a reason why Russia fights as it does. The reason why Russia fights as it does is because this is the way Russia fights. There, in the Russian military mind, there really is no atrocity. There is no war crime. They will do anything and everything in order to inflict terror, casualties, uh, fear. You know, I that's my assumption, Chuck. They might have signed the Geneva Convention, but clearly they don't care about the Geneva Convention. Look how they treat Ukrainian prisoners of war.
No, they certainly don't. And look, the use of these chemical weapons, it's no accident, right? A local commander did not get the wrong color grenades
Yeah,
and send them to the front, right? You don't, this decision was made at the very top, right? Chemical weapons get handled in an entirely different way in the logistical stream than other munitions, uh, straight from the top. And unfortunately, they're getting away with it,
yeah,
right? They are getting away from it. But do take a look at that one. And I think that's maybe the third or fourth time I have written or filmed about Russian chemical weapons use. Another uptick we see, unfortunately, there has been in the last couple of weeks noticed an increase in the number of fires after Russian attacks on various cities. This morning, we published some information. Ukrainian EOD techs inspecting a shot down Shahed drone saw that it was filled with incendiary submunitions, right? So these are cluster bombs that are filled with thermite, which is a magnesium and other powdered metals. Once you start it, it's like the blood in the movie Alien. It simply burns through. It just, whatever it's in, it burns through. We carried them to destroy our communications equipment and even to destroy safes. You pull the pin, it doesn't explode. It starts sputtering out the bottom. You put that on a car engine, a jet cockpit, anything, and it just creates this molten metal that burns through everything. And that's what the Russians are using in their submunitions. So again, you're hitting a civilian target with incendiary ammunition. I think we could all hit the Geneva Convention and see what that looks like as well. But this is something, Alan, unfortunately, they're getting away with.
yeah. And Russia does it for only one purpose in these strikes on civilian targets. It's to cause as many casualties as possible. Uh, and they're also using uh, cluster munitions. This is just, these are warheads filled with shrapnel.
Yeah, there's bomblets, the submunitions, and again, there are places that it is appropriate to use submunitions. Here's one that wouldn't be appropriate: the Kramatorsk train station. As a train was pulling in, full of refugees, and getting more refugees on board, the Russians fired a short-range ballistic missile or two with cluster munitions and struck that large group of civilians. Right? That we've written about that as well. Alan and I have both talked about it. Russia keeps jumping the shark as far as atrocities go. They just keep doing it. Those munitions are designed to be used against armored columns, right? They're designed to be used against armored vehicles. There is no military utility. There's no need. There's no rationalization, no justification to that kind of weapon on 300 unarmed civilians at a train station.
Yeah.
They Wednesday with the Russian army. Nothing.
Other targets that Russia aimed at and struck overnight and the previous night, humanitarian warehouse filled with millions of tons of humanitarian supplies. You know, everything from food to clothes to medical supplies. Also struck a relief kitchen And again, it was the loss of uh, tons of supplies that hurt the most, as well as the destruction of the warehouse and kitchen themselves. But it's the loss of food for hungry Ukrainians who have no place to cook, frankly, because their home has been destroyed or they have been displaced. Those are the two other significant targets that Russia hit, and all the while Russia claims they are using precision weapons. So if they are precision weapons, they must be aiming at what they intend to hit. If they aren't precision weapons, then all they're doing is lobbing ballistic missiles in the middle of densely packed residential neighborhoods of Kyiv, for example.
Yeah, yeah, let's take them at their word. They are precision strike munitions. And then we come in, right? And listeners know, look, what hit the child oncology ward, right? Precision strike munition. What's the last night? What was plowing into apartment buildings on the 10th floor, right? There's no military targets up there. And there is no equivalency, moral or militarily, between the targets that Ukraine hits, industry, air bases, energy production facilities, not power stations, right? We're talking about the refineries that produce the energy products that Russia sells, right? And what's Russia hitting? Refugee warehouses. They're hitting mobile kitchens. They're hitting civilians in their beds at night. There isn't, you can't help but detect in this some sort of I don't know, frustration on the parts of the Russians. I simply don't get it. You've got a MiG 31K. There's only about 10 of them that can actually launch a Kenzal aeroballistic missile. The best weapons you have are without a doubt, the pinnacle of Russian military technology. And you're hitting an apartment building with it?
Yeah.
That tells me your target folder isn't very thick. And there's something to be said for that, folks. Believe me, it's a pretty low priority.
Yeah. Well, one thing that Chuck and I are going to continue to watch,
in
and
terms of
that
military utility. Civilian casualties.
I just lost your audio there for a second, Chuck. So I hope I didn't talk over you, but what we're going to be watching uh, will be the scale of Russian drone and missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, and this is Kyiv, Chernihiv, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, uh, and last week as far west as Ternopil, which is not too far from Lviv. So again, it is the entire country of Ukraine that is at risk of drone and missile attacks. I fully expect Russia to keep up with the number of drones and missiles it's been firing every night. They're capable of it. They have been able to actually increase production in their military industrial complex. In fact, we might just address that in the last few minutes of the show. When Russia makes an advance of some kind, maybe it's with fiber optic drones or something like that, they're a large enough country so that they can scale up manufacture relatively quickly. If Ukraine makes such an advance in innovation, it's more difficult because they must keep manufacture highly dispersed and then bring it together for assembly and deployment. And they just don't have as large a military industrial complex as Russia, obviously. So Russia will continue to outproduce Ukraine in terms of firepower.
Yeah, and that means that Ukraine is going to have to continue to out innovate their enemies. Uh, Again, that the dispersal of the industries is actually they made a virtue out of necessity, and Ukraine is on on track this year to manufacture at least 1 million drones domestically, and that doesn't include everything it can buy everywhere else. The capabilities and performance of Ukrainian drones is a generation in terms of their drone capability and performance is about 3 months, not not 10 years. For example, there's a Mars drone now. It is the latest development. There was one called the Anvil a couple of years ago, and this is a drone that leading edges are made of titanium, and it intercepts Shaheeds simply with kinetic shock. And the thing can go 155 knots, which is about 170 miles an hour, and it weighs, I don't know, it's just like eating a brick at 170 miles an hour. So that's what I mean about the innovations. And again, this thing is it is algorithm enhanced in terms of targeting. It has low light and thermal cameras. I put an infographic up on one today. Looks a little bit like something out of Buck Rogers. It has ducted turbo fans. Just a kind of an incredible piece of kit.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking at it right now, Chuck, and Ukraine has put an emphasis on drone interceptors. It's something that they identified uh, as a vitally important need on the zero line, especially. And this Mars interceptor does look like something right out of Buck Rogers.
yeah, it absolutely. And we talk about the democratization of air power, right? And I mentioned this before. Like I had to get on the satellite phone and say, "You're over there, drop a bomb on them." Now I turn to someone in my rifle squad, and he puts up a first-person drone, and it gets the target. I look overhead and I see there are enemy aircraft, not necessarily even planes, but I've got enemy drones. Another guy in my own rifle squad releases a drone and it goes up and intercepts the bad guy drone. Democratization of air power.
Yeah.
And that happens from about 14,000 feet down to the to mean sea level. This is going on every day. Ukraine is knocking out Russian loitering munitions and reconnaissance drones and first person drones in direct 1v1 conflict in the sky. And you can see the intercept videos, the wild hornets, birds of Magar that are putting it up. You're getting literally scores of these intercepts every day. And I wouldn't be surprised if the number, actually, the last number I saw for drones lost in the last 48 hours was 154 Russian drones. So literally 100 times a day, we're getting air-to-air kills, drone to drone.
And these are frontline drones, not the attack drones
Right.
going against Ukrainian cities. There are weapons that Ukraine has developed, is developing its own ballistic missile called the Sapsan. We haven't really taken a look at that yet, but it has been announced by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The Sapsan ballistic missile is going into mass production. So maybe in the remainder of the year, they could make 30 or 40 of these missiles. Ukraine has developed its own version of HIMARS that is already in mass production, and Ukraine has developed uh, its uh, its own self-propelled howitzer, the Bodana. That has been very successful on the zero line and is also in mass production. It's something like the French Caesar howitzer, I guess, Chuck.
Yeah, exactly. It's a self-propelled gun, very mobile. Uh, we've seen these are 21st century weapons. The analogs are the Caesar, the Swedish Archer, and of course the Bodan. There are also Ukraine has an urgent need to get into the ballistic missile business because the Russians have geared their production up so they can produce somewhere around 60 Iskanders a month. So that's two a day, but those are two ballistic missiles that are going to be aimed at Ukrainian cities, right? So, and a ballistic missile, short range ballistic missile, even a very good one, has a circular error probable of like 100 yards, right? Uh, every one of these missiles is nuclear capable. That's why countries like Russia got into the short range ballistic missile business. This is when people were weighing the possibilities of a European war, NATO versus the Soviet Union. So they're not terribly accurate, but if you can land 700 pounds of high explosive in the neighborhood of something, you're getting there. And unfortunately, if your target is a neighborhood, then you're going to hit it.
Well, Chuck and I are here to focus on Ukraine and to keep your attention focused on Ukraine as well. Maybe in a future show, we'll talk a little bit about the Israeli Iranian war, but probably we'll remain focused on Ukraine. And what we've done today is given you, our viewers here at Indications and Warnings, a few tips of what to be watching in this coming week. Look for news from Kreminna, from the Liman direction, news about Russian surrenders. Uh, Keep your eye down around Velika Novosilka and see what those Ukrainian raids produced. Uh, Keep your eyes south of Chasiv and the Ukrainian forces now pointed once again at the canal between Chasiv and Bakhmut. That was such an important defensive line. And of course, keep your eye on Pokrovsk, which is where Ukrainian defense has been especially valiant, Chuck.
Absolutely. They're holding, folks. They're holding, and the waves that are breaking against the bulwark of Ukrainian defenses, look, those waves are getting smaller and they're getting fewer between. It takes soldiers, trained men, warriors to win wars, right? Russia isn't producing warriors or trained soldiers. Shoot, move, communicate. Those are skills that it takes a year for an army private to be of any utility to an infantry company at all. A year of training, right? What's Savatnik get? He gets knocked on the head in the metro in Moscow, and 4 days later he's in Liman. And some of those guys surrendered this afternoon, and we'll see how many when we get to the next show. We'll make a point of running that information down.
And definitely keep your eye on the pace of Russia's missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities. It's, unfortunately, I guess it's the first thing I look at every morning, Chuck. I open my phone and the air alerts are filling it. So over 20 last night. That was the first thing I did on my phone this morning to get to reports about the overnight attacks in Ukraine. If our viewers are looking for a way to help, especially now in light of Russia's increasing missile and drone assault on Ukraine, take a look in the video description underneath this episode of Indications and Warnings, and you'll find verified charitable and humanitarian uh, outlets that you can contribute to and help in Ukraine. And I'd encourage you all to do that.
Absolutely, folks. Alan and I, we are doing this. We're going to continue doing this, and we are happy to bring attention and recommend worthwhile charities for you to donate to. Refugee relief, the feeding and care of displaced persons, injured civilians, all of that is an absolute necessity. This is a dirty, vicious war. Uh, and whatever you can do, let's look. We're here to fight the power. And Al and I are telling you we're going to be here until this war is over, and then we're going to do the reconstruction. So we're in it to win it. We're not going home.
Well, thank you again, Chuck. Uh, we'll see you later this week with more maps, more news, probably more breaking news as well. Until then, Slava Ukraini.
Heroam Slava. Thank you, everybody. Good night, and we'll see you again soon.